Bob Herbert's OpEd.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. In a potentially historic move, the city of New York has created a Racial Justice Commission. It will examine the systemic race-based injustices and inequities embedded in the operations of city government, and it will recommend remedies. The commission will be led by Jennifer Jones Austin, the Chief Executive Officer of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, and I am pleased to welcome her as my guest. Jennifer, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure that congratulations are in order. I'm looking for prayers and best wishes, but on the other side, we'll say congratulations.
Well, we'll send the prayers and the best wishes as well. Technically, this is a charter revision commission, so it's a very big deal. The Charter Revision Commission means that this can make recommendations to change the city charter, which is essentially the city's constitution. So actually, let's start right from the beginning. Why do we need this type of commission?
Absolutely. So I appreciate your asking that question, and I appreciate you beginning there, because many people don't really have a full appreciation of what the charter is. And that's understandable, because we don't walk around on a daily basis talking about New York City laws and the charter. The charter is, as you said, essentially the city's constitution. It is a statement of the laws based on guiding values, principles, and beliefs for how New York City municipal government should run. It covers everything from the elections, who is elected and how they are elected, to the responsibilities of our elected officials, all the way through to the government agencies, how they are run, what their missions are, what their missions are. And additionally, it also looks at who sits on what boards that determine how our daily interactions, behaviors, et cetera, how they are managed, how they are carried out. And so the charter is critical. It's absolutely critical. And the reason we are looking at the charter is because what we know in our nation, beginning with the United States Constitution, which dictated, who was entitled to what, what services and supports, who was entitled to vote, who was entitled to hold property, who was considered a human or / 3/5 of a man. Right. We know that it is the Constitution, it is the law of the land that sets up how our society should function. And it is the law of the land, beginning with the United States Constitution, and now looking across our nation at our governments, whether they be state or at the local level, that then also now have these laws embedded in them that have set us up for an unequal society. That's why we have to look at the charter, because here in New York City, like in other places, it is these laws that have set us up to have an unequal society.
The directives to the commission were outlined in a public announcement by Mayor de Blasio. But tell us more or less in layman's terms what you see as the mandate of the commission.
So we have to look at that charter, identify, the way that I'm thinking about it is we have to look at the power differentials. We have to look at access and opportunity. That's a kind of as plain speak as I can get, if you will, at this particular moment in our process. What we know is that government is set up in a way where there are some people who have power, and they've been aided by government and laws to hold on to that power for centuries now. We know that, that laws are set up in a way that give certain people access to certain resources, services, and supports, as well as to access to power. And we know that opportunity is not just based on personal responsibility in this nation, but opportunity is afforded people, again, by the laws of our society. And so what we're going to be doing when we look at this charter is looking at power, access, and opportunity. Who has power based on what the charter provides, and what should we do differently to make sure that power is more evenly, more equitably distributed? Who has access to resources and services and to power? And look at how we change that to make sure that it's more equitable. And the same thing for opportunity.
The assumption behind the creation of such a commission is that the power and the access has been inequitable, has been distributed inequitably, unfairly when it comes to Black people, to African Americans, and Black people who are actually not African Americans in New York City. Is that a fair assumption? And if that's the case, why has it been distributed unfairly? And is there, can you explain in some ways how it's been distributed unjustly or unfairly?
Absolutely. I keep on saying absolutely because the lawyer in me shouldn't talk about things in terms of absolute.
We say that. We say absolutely. I say it too much.
Good deal. Good deal. So what we know, just as when we look at the beginnings of our society, of this nation, capitalism being primary, we had to figure out who would have, or I should say our founders centered on who could have and who could not have. And so slaves were determined to not be, were not to be the recipients of, or were not going to be the beneficiaries of property and land and the entitlements that came therefrom, even with Reconstruction, where they were to have some that didn't play out. So we have this capitalist society, who can have, who cannot. And the way that it was propped up was through racism, right? Who could have, who could not. And we begin with Blacks as not being entitled to. 400 plus years now, we still are living in a society where that is practiced and where we still have kind of the residual impacts or effects of that. And so what we have to do when we look at this chart is to see how that is actually playing out. What we know is that when we look at government contracting, there have been provisions over the course of the years that have allowed certain people to be eligible for certain contracts and other people not. When you look at things like pension planning, and you look at bids for companies, firms to take over pension planning and managing for the city of New York, there have been instances where there's been a threshold criteria with respect to how much you must have in assets in order to actually compete for a contract. Well, what we know is that because of racism, Black Americans have not had the access to capital that white Americans have. So if laws like that or provisions like that still hold, then when you say who is eligible for a contract, you can appreciate that certain people are going to be left out. And then it likely is the case in many different places and spaces. Who gets to decide where certain schools will be cited, where homeless shelters will be cited, where jails will be put now that we're going to break down Rikers? Where are pollutant organizations? Where do they get pulled up out of the city? Who's deciding that? It's all based on who's in power and who gets to appoint who to certain positions to make these decisions. And so if we don't have laws on the books that say that that our communities and our boards, our positions of power and responsibility are not representative, reflective of our city, then that power is going to continue to reside with certain people.
Will you be looking at things, for example, about inequities in the criminal justice system, in the police department, in housing, in employment, all of that?
Across the board. So, it's a daunting task in some respects. But I think we're up for it. I believe we're up for it. The charter itself is several hundred pages, single spaced, and it touches, again, everything from appointments and elections to how city government agencies and offices within City Hall run. My thinking is that we need to hear from the community. We need to hear from the community some of the concerns that they have. They may center on everything from policing and racialized policing, the over-policing of income of communities of color with low income, to how people are arrested, how we go about determining what crimes people are arrested for and what the level of offenses are and the charges are. And then it may look at, what do we do about hiring, the civil service exams? What do we do about procurement? And and community-based organizations versus larger organizations with multi like 7, 8, 9-figure operating budgets. What do we do about that to level the playing field? So my thinking is that the way that we jump into this work is we hear from community, we hear their lived experiences every day, but then we're going to have to do the work of translating that into what the charter says. Right? Because somebody may say to us that they find that in their particular community, there are organizations that are emitting pollutants and nothing's being done about that. We may not see a provision in the charter that speaks directly to that. But in the charter, we will look at city planning and land use laws that tie into that. And we have to look at how these laws by design, by implementation, or by impact, disparately and discriminatorily impact Black, Brown, and other marginalized and long oppressed communities. So it's going to be this back and forth. We're going to hear from our commissioners, who I'm so proud to be joined up in this effort with, because they represent not only our different boroughs, but they represent different interests and concerns. Many of them have had their feet on the ground working with people, Black, Brown, Asian, and other immigrant communities, communities representing women, marginalized transgender persons, the list goes on and on. We're going to take their experiences, their knowledge, and bring that to bear as well. And I should lastly say, we're going to look at the charter. Now, everything may not be a change in law. Every change that is required may not be a change in law. We need to look at policies too in the government agencies and beyond. We're also going to see what we learn about what the private sector is doing and what more it can be doing. Should be doing.
It seems like an immense job. Can you give us a sense of how you're going to go about it? Will you be holding hearing, calling witnesses? You mentioned you'll be talking with commissioners and that sort of thing. Give us a sense of how you're going to conduct this commission.
Absolutely. So beginning in mid-April, we are going to start having open public meetings. So when the commission gathers, the meetings are public. What we're first going to do is to make sure that we do like a level setting. Make sure that every commissioner has a full appreciation for what the charter is, what the charter does, how it functions. That meeting is going to be open to the public so the public too can understand what the charter is. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to begin having meetings where we invite the community in, for the community to just share with us some of their concerns and some of their experiences as they see it with respect to racism, bias, oppression, marginalization. We're going to learn from the community. We're going to reach out to experts, people who've been at work in this space for significant periods of time and have done some meaningful work. We're going to talk to experts from around the country and maybe even some beyond. We're going to do our own homework. We're going to do some reading. We're going to study the South Africa Truth and Justice Reconciliation Commission. We're going to look at some of the works that have come out in recent years that center on specific problems. An example would be, there's an organization, NeoGov, that just recently released a report that shows that Black females are hired well below their representation in the U.S. population for public sector jobs. Right. Why is that? Why is that? Try to understand, what is that? What's that? What is the phenomenon, if you will, and how does that tie in with laws? How can we change that? We're going to look at reports like Citigroup's report that show that because of racism, that the U.S. Economy has lost $16 trillion in just the last several years because of racism. What can we do about that? What does that say about access to capital? And what can
Right.
the city do about that?
You mentioned several groups who would have concerns, and presumably will be able to have representatives speaking for them at these public hearings. And that anticipates a question that I had, because it's a racial justice commission. I wanted to know if you were just going to look at sort of the concerns or the inequities that affect African Americans or Black people in New York City, or will there be other groups who may have concerns? I'm thinking in terms of the anti-Asian violence that we've seen lately, the continuing problem of anti-Semitism.
Mhm.
So how narrow or how broad is the mandate of this commission?
It is broad. It is broad. What we're going to try to do, though, is while it is broad, really develop the structure that ensures that all voices are heard and that the concerns as they extend beyond persons of color, beginning with Black persons, are addressed as well. What we know, Bob, what you and I both know, is that racism in our nation, began with slavery, but we can actually maybe even take it back a little further and look at how indigenous persons,
Without a doubt.
right, were robbed. And so what we understand is that racism is very much like a cancer. You can't contain many cancers, right? They're not just isolated, they grow. And what our nation has done is it has allowed racism to grow and extend. And again, just based on my background and training and upbringing, we have to understand what the triggers are, or what the impetus, what the catalyst behind this is. What is the genesis of this? And so much of this is tied to capitalism and power. And so the way that we're going to really get at this, I'm not saying we're upending capitalism. So I'm not making that kind of news here. That's not what I'm saying. But Heather McGhee has written a book that we're also going to be reading, The Sum of Us, that talks about racism at its core, and this sense that there's only but so much, and so some people get to have while others don't. What we appreciate here in our society is that it's not just Blacks that don't have access. There are other people of Hispanic origin that have been denied access. We see that, we do see how it plays into who's worthy and who's not. Asian Americans and their experiences and the hate that is being visited upon them, anti-Semitism and the hate that is visited there. It has to extend beyond, but we do know that it is firmly rooted in this society, in the experience of Black Americans, but it has grown very much like a cancer. We have to look at it all.
Now, some aspects of this will inevitably be controversial. And one aspect that I'm sure will be controversial is the issue of reparations, because that's already become part of the discussion. And my understanding is that the commission is in fact going to look at the idea of reparations for Black New Yorkers. If it is decided, and I understand that we're a long way from that, but if it's decided that reparations are a good and just way to proceed, give us a sense of what forms those reparations could take.
So it's still very early in the process, as you indicated. But we are seeing examples in other localities. You take Evanston, Illinois as an example. Evanston, Illinois looked at housing discrimination visited upon Black Americans in that city. And what they have determined is that they're going to look at families, Black families who were in the Evanston community from 1919 to 1969. And they're giving them, they are paying to them, I shouldn't say giving them, they are paying them about I believe it's about $25,000 per family as a form of reparation. Maybe that's something we look at. We also know that they were also looking at, and other places have looked at education and education discrimination visited upon Black Americans. That may be another place that we look at. Maybe we need to look at what is done in city colleges, community and four-year colleges in the city of New York, and what can possibly be done there. My son is a student at the University of Virginia, and he's a freshman, and back in August when we took him down, we were excited because we learned that the university had just unveiled a monument to the several thousand slaves that helped build the University of Virginia.
Wow.
And, we were very excited to tour it. I can tell you, Bob, that as I toured it, it's a beautiful monument done in marble, beautiful, and it's etched in the marble are the names of both unknown slaves. So it's like an unknown slave, written as such, and then
Right.
the specific people. As I began to tour it, my heart filled with like kind of a sense of gratitude that they were being recognized. As I continued touring, I realized that I was filling with anger. And it occurred to me that the best the state of Virginia can do for the descendants of slaves, or for slaves, I should say, to honor them, is to have a monument
A
erected.
monument.
Why not give free tuition for Virginia schools, state schools, to the descendants of those slaves? Let's begin there, right? So I think we need to do that type of work, and we need to push that it's not just a recognition. We are going to acknowledge the harms, but we need to figure out if and how we go deeper and farther.
So we go beyond the symbolic and get to some of the substantial aspects of these issues.
I think it's important. I think it's important because what we can appreciate with all of the reforms that we seek to make is that they can help us on a going forward basis. But there are generations, that have long, passed on, but that have family today that are still struggling because of all of these racial injustices. Are we going to forget them? Or do we figure out how to honor them as well?
It's interesting that you mentioned Virginia. One half of my family, my mother's side, came up from Virginia, so I'm familiar with a lot of what was
So maybe you can help me on that one.
going on down there. I'll be happy to try. Who's on this commission? If I hope I have this correct. I think there's 11 members on the commission. Obviously, I don't need all of their names, but how are they selected? What communities do they represent? How diverse in terms of either ethnicity or political views or whatever? Give us a sense of the makeup of this commission.
So there are 11 commissioners. There is an executive director who will be guiding and supporting our efforts. Additionally,
that's separate and apart from you, you're the chair of the commission.
I'm the chair of the commission.
Yeah.
The vice chair, and I'll try not to give you too many names, but just to highlight.
That's all right.
The vice chair is Henry Garita, who is the executive director of DC 37, which represents many persons of color in service jobs, both within government and outside of government in the nonprofit sector. And then in addition to him, we have a couple of persons who are actually city employees, but have a wealth of knowledge and experience, serving in city planning, serving in probation, leading in those spaces and places, and both have been doing a lot of work centered on inequity issues. We have people who work in academia. We have Derek Hamilton, who is a professor at the New School and is also the founding director of the Center for Race and Political Economy. He's an economist. And we have Laree Daniel Favors, and she is the interim executive director at the Medgar Evers Social Justice Center and a general counsel there. We have people from all of the boroughs. Yesenia Mata, who leads La Colmena and has done a lot of work centering on the experiences of immigrant communities, has done a lot of work in worker cooperatives and day labor supports, and she's in Staten Island. I don't know if I said that, but she's in Staten Island. Right. We've got Chris Quee, Christopher Quee, who is the former executive director of Asians Americans for Equality, and Joanne Yu, who is with Asian American Federation. And they are in Queens. We have a few more people. We have a gentleman by the name of Kay Bain. And Kay Bain is, he's done a lot of work centered on anti-gun violence and founded the Community Capacity Development Organization, which works with a lot of youth on the ground. And then we have people from the faith community. We have Fred Davey, who is the Executive Vice President of Union Theological Seminary, also is the chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. It's a good, strong group. They are representative of New York City. The executive director is Anusha Venkatraman, a Southeast Asian, and she has a lot of connect with the community. She formerly served as New York City Service executive director. But that's not where we're stopping. Our responsibility is to make sure that we're connecting with all of the communities, especially those who are most impacted. And so we have a responsibility that even if we don't necessarily have a specific community that is represented on the task force, on the commission, to make sure that those persons are brought into the conversation. So we're going to be doing a lot of public engagement.
I guess we're going to have to stop there because we've run out of time, but I hope we can have you back from time to time to keep us informed about the progress of this commission, because this is obviously very important work for the city of New York. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it.
To our viewers, I want to thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.